I'm Owen Bigland. This is the Inside Edge video blog. Want to do a follow-up to the blog I did about a month ago on the various, the gauntlet of taxes that BC homeowners are faced with right now, as far as the BC spec tax or vacancy tax, the Vancouver empty homes tax, the school tax, the foreign buyers tax, on what I call generally envy taxes. And I knew I was going to get a lot of comments and a lot of emails from people. It's a very polarizing topic for sure. It's something that I've been addressing on my blog here for the last 3 years. And I really encourage people to go back to the blogs I was doing in the fall of 2016, all of 2017. I was talking about the foreign buyers tax, how it's being triggered, and I did many blogs on how the government is going after the nickels and dimes on this end, where the stacks of $100 bills are going out the back door. And I gave you my suggestions, which some of the media picked up on, by the way, on really what needs to be addressed to solve some of the problems we've got in the Vancouver housing market. And I've said all along, it's not a perfect market. We've got some things that need to be fixed. Go back and watch my earlier blogs on this back 2 years ago, please. I go into great detail on where the money is going, what needs to be looked at, where they need to stop this flow and get away from kind of what I'm calling this sleight of hand that's going on right now, this smoke and mirrors, where the government's trying to make it look like they're doing something when they're really not. Again, they're going after the pennies and nickels here when the big bucks are going out the back door. So let me go through it. And again, I go into much more detail on this a few years ago, but I'll kind of summarize my suggestions on what needs to be done here. So if you go back 2 years ago, I talked about the big problem we've got, and it's still ongoing, is the abuse of the principal residence exemption. And I did many blogs on this. So what was happening is buyers were coming, let's say they're coming from China. Now, they're not foreign buyers, first off. That's one thing we have to point out. They're not triggering the foreign buyers tax. Nobody is, nobody ever did. But they have their Canadian passport or their permanent residency status. They are coming in and purchasing homes for the husband, and then they're buying a second house and putting the wife on title, and then they're maybe buying a third or fourth home and putting each child on title. And the kids might be 20, 21 years old, going to UBC or SFU. And I pointed out many examples of this going on in West Richmond over the years, where the owner is a 21-year-old kid who's not working, going to school, or not even going to school, and he's the owner of a $3.5 million house, or a spec house that they build and then later on sell for $1 million or $1.5 million capital gain, and they trigger that principal residence exemption, no tax is paid. So my solution to that was simple. Like everyone else in Canada has to abide by. You only get one principal residence per person. You can only have one principal residence at any time for tax purposes. The other solution, I said, is that anyone that buys a home in Canada, or let's call it in Vancouver or Richmond or Burnaby or wherever, if they want to claim that principal residence exemption, that money to purchase that home has to have been earned and taxed in Canada. So it's being purchased with after-tax income, just like me and everybody else in the city has to do. And if someone wants to buy a house, and I've got nothing wrong with someone if they want to come in and they're not even holding a Canadian passport or PR status and want to pay that 20% foreign buyers tax, let them. But most of them have that. Even still, if the money wasn't earned in Canada, hey, let them buy that Shaughnessy or that Kerrisdale or that Kitsilano home. But the big difference is because that money wasn't earned in Canada, they cannot declare that home as a principal residence and get the tax break. In other words, there's no capital gains tax paid. And this is where the tens of billions of dollars is going out the back here, folks. Tens of billions of dollars over the years, because I've seen it firsthand in places like East Vancouver, West Side Vancouver, and Richmond, West Richmond especially, where homes are in multiple kids' names. They buy the house, keep it for 3 or 4 years, sell it, make $1 million capital gain, and no tax is triggered because you got a 21-year-old kid who has it on title as his principal residence. Money was not earned in Canada, and really isn't a principal residence because the real bread earner, the guy who really bought the house, was the dad, and he's already got a house in his name and a house in the wife's name. That is where the big bucks are going. The second way, of course, which was news to me as well, was on all the pre-sale assignments, which was enlightening to me as well. Over the last 7 or 8 years, people have been selling assignments, as it turns out, and not paying any tax on it. Now, the first thing I should point out is the vast majority of people that would have bought a pre-sale, let's say 5 years ago, and then sold it last year as an assignment. So let's say they paid, to keep it simple, $100,000, sold it last year for $200,000. They made $100,000 what we call a lift when you assign it, or $100,000 profit. Now, the majority of these sellers did it the right way, and when they filed their taxes that year to Revenue Canada, they would have reported that $100,000 capital gain. However, it turns out over the last few years that some of these sellers, and this is probably hundreds and hundreds of units, maybe thousands of units, were sold via assignment, and the sellers did not report any of that lift or capital gain. Now, I guess I'm kind of naive. I always thought that the developers filed these documents to Revenue Canada. Simple filing saying, hey, this guy bought the condo 4 years ago or 3 years ago. He just sold it as an assignment, so it didn't show up on the MLS or land titles. He simply sold the original contract for a $250,000 profit. Here's the contract, which has the seller who made the money and the new buyer. But I was wrong. Those apparently were never filed with CRA. And I hear now, of course, that they are going back and auditing some of these projects. It's been in the news that there was a few in Richmond, some in Surrey, but I'm not sure why Revenue Canada isn't going back and auditing all these pre-sales over the last 5 or 6 years. The records are all there. The developer is innocent on this. The developer sold this as got involved in the assignment. It's between the seller and the new buyer. The developer would have all those records that shows who they sold it to and what the profit was. Here was the original purchase price. This is what it was assigned to the new buyer. So I'm not sure if eventually Revenue Canada is going to go and audit all these. I know they've done some, but again, this is where billions with a B, have gone out the back door on these two, on the abuses of the principal resident exemption and not auditing or not going back and people not declaring the assignment lifts or profits they made on pre-sales. Again though, most people, I would say for every 1,000 assignments that were done, I'm going to say at least 900 probably did it the right way and declared that income. But there was still a lot apparently that didn't, and as you've seen in the news, they've been auditing these projects where they're finding dozens and dozens of these assignments and no income tax was ever paid. Now that is just straight out tax fraud, and these people should be prosecuted. And I think it should open up more of these audits. But you see, the thing is, it's going to cost millions and millions of dollars to hire more auditors to go back, go to the developer, have them submit all their assignment contracts and then cross-reference it to see if that seller declared that capital gain on his tax return for that year. It's going to take time and money. However, if they spend $25 million on more auditors and they bring in $1 billion or $500 million, I would think it's worth it. But the point I want to make here with these two things is this is where the big bucks are going, but yet the city of Vancouver and the NDP government have instead decided to go after the pennies. The easy, low-hanging fruit is what I would call it, where the big money is gone unchecked. And it's a bit of a sleight of hand, smoke and mirror, of course, to make it look like they're doing something. And they're not. The Vancouver empty homes tax, we're now into the second year. It was announced 2 years ago. So we've had time now to evaluate its effectiveness. It has not done anything to boost the number of one-bedroom units that are for rent or affordable units in Vancouver whatsoever. Vacancy still remains almost 1%. It has not brought down the cost of affordable condos, very little, 2-3%, but that's more for mortgage rules and things like that. And it has not brought in very little money into the coffers for affordable housing. They promised hundreds of millions when the Vancouver empty homes taxes brought in net maybe $20 million. So we've got billions of dollars going out for the abuse of the principal residence exemption, and people just not declaring capital gains on pre-sales and on assignments. But we're going after this piddly little money with the Vancouver empty homes tax, and I can tell you, we're only into 3 or 4 months with the BC spec tax year. Most people have filed. There's still a bunch that haven't or are under appeal. At this time next year, I can tell you those numbers are going to be underwhelming. It's going to be 20, 30, 40 million dollars. This isn't going to move the needle at all on what's collected. And look at the optics on this, how it makes us look to many other cities in the world. They're wondering what's going on, and I know people are going to disagree, but they're really targeting a lot of the people that have gotten caught up in these taxes, or the people that have done it right. You know, it's not a crime to have a second home. If you're a BC born and raised in Vancouver, and you've got a second property to let your kids use, or you use on weekends, you live out in the Fraser Valley and you want a condo downtown, you don't want to rent it out, it's, used part-time. Vacation homes. So many people have emailed me and commented on my YouTube blog that have been caught up in this tax. They're going after the wrong people here. They're going after the nickels and dimes when the big bucks are going out the back door. And now, you see, the reason they're going after this low-hanging fruit is because it's easy. It's easy to go after these type of people. This is the NDP's playbook. This is how they roll. They always have. This is why they don't last long in government. They last 2 or 3 years and then they're out. Just like 20 years ago. A lot of my viewers are too young to remember. I don't. I remember. This is how they work. But you see, to go after the big stuff, the abuses of the principal residence exemption, not filing your taxes and not declaring taxes to CRA on assignments and pre-sales, this is going to involve much higher levels of government. This is going to involve the federal government. This is going to involve CRA. This is going to involve banks and governments in China, in Europe, in the United States. This is complicated stuff. It really is. It's going to involve much higher governments and a lot more money, a lot more auditors at much higher levels. So you see, the NDP will go after the easy stuff, the easy targets, the guys with a vacation home or a second home. But it's just nickels and dimes they're going after here. It's, as they say, it's sleight of hand. It's meant to look like we're doing something. We're bringing in money. We're going to stop this problem when the big bucks are being completely ignored, and it will continue to be until they start focusing on that. They're making things worse, in my opinion. And people are going to find that out in another 2 or 3 years, because I'm going to do another blog on this to give you some more of the repercussions of what's going on with all these taxes. And what it's doing is it's completely stopped new development now. Now in Vancouver, new development is all going to be luxury, so forget that. The new development that's stalled downtown here is $1,500 to $2,500 a square foot. It's all on hold. But it's not, so that's not going to move the needle at all. But even in areas like East Vancouver, Richmond, Burnaby, I'm going to do another blog and tell you what's going on there too. Development is stopped right now. Developers do not want to build. They do not want to wade into this uncertain market with the current government we've got. And it's a fact. I'll give you proof with it. I've got several clients that are involved in land assemblies right now that everything is done. It's off. They're terminating the listings. Developers have told them flat out, we're done. Maybe in a year and a half, 2 years, we'll revisit it. But for right now, too uncertain. Don't know what's going on with another shoe to drop. They're tinkering around with the tenancy laws. I'll just stay on the sidelines until we've got a little more clarity. So it'll be that coiled spring effect that I talk about. It'll just increase the leverage we're going to get when the market does eventually turn. And when that is, that might be a year, 2 years, or 3 years. But demand isn't going anywhere. All we're doing is curtailing the demand right now and trying to curb demand with a bunch of these taxes. But again, the point I wanted to make with those envy taxes is we're really going after the pennies and dimes and nickels there. The big problem is going to involve CRA, the abuses of the principal residence exemption, people not paying their taxes on pre-sales and assignments. Those are the things that where would put billions of dollars into the coffers, not these small $10,000 and $15,000 bringing in on the Vancouver empty homes tax. So stay tuned for another blog. I'll talk one more about just kind of the repercussions of what's going on right now with the supply side. And I've said all along that in a city like Vancouver, very difficult to curb demand. Demand is 35, 40,000 new people moving into the lower mainland every year. That's why you have vacancy at 1%. And that's why you're paying $2,200 or $2,300 a month for a typical one bedroom. What's happening now, though, they're making that problem worse. Developers now, the cavalry is not on the way. They're not going to be building in this environment. When the market finally does turn, more people coming in, we're going to be caught with our pants down, just like we have the last few cycles. And on it goes here. I'm Owen Bigland. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.